right. Cool. Can everybody see? If you want a little bit closer view, you can move up. Otherwise, stay where you are. So the program, we usually just do a quick outline at the beginning. This is pretty much the standard thing that we do. We'll cover a pretty good variety of birds with an emphasis on comparisons of similar species. Encourage audience participation. We'll ask you from time to time if you have a guess as to what the bird is, or if you have any questions, certainly feel free to ask at any time. And we will be discussing not only the physical identification of birds, but also their behavior, vocalizations, habitat, and other natural history aspects as they are relevant. So we'll kick off with our first slide. Oops, too quick. Anyway, so obviously, probably if you have any familiarity with birds, you figure we have two gulls here, two actually smaller gulls. And though size is kind of difficult to judge if you have nothing to compare it to, our larger gulls have big, heavy, thick bills and are kind of robust in shape. These are not. So we got to assume with these small bills, long pointed wings, and not too chunky appearance that these are smaller species of gulls. The one on the left, especially we're going to notice bill shape is important in gulls. There's a very small, slim, petite bill. Also, like I said, the longish wings. This kind of brownish wash on the breast is not found in too many gulls, not really in any smaller gulls that we have normally. And this, in this case, is a mew gull. Oh, sorry. I meant to start off the other way and then mention mew gull. It's a short-billed gull, which until recently was the mew gull, is now split into short-billed gull and common gull, the European version, which is very similar species. So again, one thing to look for on these very small gulls, in a mew gull, and this is a first cycle or a very young bird, this brownish wash on the breast. And that's not shared by this other bird here, which is similar in size and shape. I will mention short-billed gull is a pretty scarce bird in our area, LA County. Cabrillo Beach often has a flock of them in winter, but you don't see them too frequently along the coast, and especially not inland. But it's a bird you can encounter when you're out birding in fall and winter. And then this other bird is a ring-billed gull, only slightly larger, and sometimes there can be confusion between them because they are fairly close in size. But ring-billed gulls, adults, of course, have a yellow bill with a dark ring around it, but young birds don't. They have a pale base bill with a dark tip. An interesting thing is, once past the juvenile stage at least, they don't have that dusky brown wash on the breast. They have a fairly clean white underparts. And ring-billed gull, of course, is one of our most common gulls, especially coastally. You find them inland as well. But again, look for a slightly heavier bill, slightly thicker bill, as compared to a very petite short bill on the short-billed gull, and a little more patterned upper parts in ring-billed. It's a more patterned bird generally overall in its younger ages. And then I don't know, Mickey, do you want to take the next one? Yeah. I can just look at the mic.
We can hand back and forth. Hold on there. Okay. Whenever we do this, we like to bring you from the outside of the circle down closer and closer to the inside of the circle. So I don't think anybody would mistake these birds for warblers or swallows or owls. I think they're raptors, right? We should agree to that. Birds of prey. What I look for a lot in these, actually, people look at colors and patterns immediately, but if a bird's up high, look at the wing shape. Narrow wings with pointed ends, like this bird on the left, very pointed. A red-tailed hawk does not look like that. It has a bulge here, a broader wing. So this bird on the left, it's got a dark, the coverts at the front of the wing are dark with light at the back, reminiscent of a turkey vulture, but really skinny, long wings. These are long distance migrants. The birds that go the farthest have the pointier wings. Quail don't go very far. They have rounded wings. So trying to narrow this down, if it's not a red tail or a red shouldered hawk, it's one of those Some of them I learned more toward the desert, but they're migrating in good numbers every year, north and south, going a long way. And so this is a Swainson's hawk, and I think most of you probably got that one. John put first year, dark or intermediate morph. So it's not the pure pale version. It is a dark type morph or intermediate. So some people are lucky enough to see these over their house in Pasadena, especially spring and fall. The other bird is much paler, kind of ghostly looking. Also has a pretty narrow, long wing, but it's so pale. And I mean, to me, I'm out in Antelope Valley, Palmdale area, or one of the foothill regions, and these fly by. They may perch on a telephone pole. I guess it's our largest buteo in the area, I think, right, Luke? It's a big one. Yeah. And one mark, if you're likely to see a view like this, is right there. It's a hawk that has that pale sear, yellowy sear goes way back under the eye. Other hawks don't have that. You're not probably going to be lucky to see that all the time. So the rest goes with a ferruginous hawk, juvenile. And these can be, some say common, but they can be pretty frequent out in the Antelope Valley, especially in winter. Yes. Ferruginous refers to rusty. Iron is ferrous. So the irony color is, you can see it in different plumages or different ages, but there is a lot of rust. In fact, it's one of the only other hawks than red-tailed that has a pale rusty tail.
And adults will have rusty leggings and a rusty breastband, so they look somewhat different,
Yeah.
but still shape is the same.
No, well, for one, red tails are famous for having a dark patagial bar on the patagium of the wing right here, a dark dash all the way down. That's missing here. Red tails often have a belly band right here. We don't see it on this bird. And then even the wing shape, it's much more narrow than a typical red tail. So I guess we should do next.
All right. Well, that first name wasn't supposed to fly in so fast, but that'll be an assist. We figured we'd touch on this because, you know, crows and ravens are pretty widespread and common throughout the county all year. Crows are much less common, scarce even on the desert and in the mountains, but otherwise you can find crows and ravens virtually anywhere, any time of year. And people often, especially non-birders, come up to me and ask me, how do I tell a crow from a raven? They just look the same. And there's a number of ways, as a lot of you probably already know. Common raven. I'm going to try and hold my pointer in my controller. So bill size, of course, is one major difference. Ravens are massive birds by comparison. Our largest passerine or songbird, although I don't really consider them songbirds. Science does, but I don't. But they have a very large bill, this shaggy feathering up here, and a very heavy, large bill, pretty robust build, fairly long tail. And we'll see flight shots in a minute that'll kind of show more of the shape of the tail. When they're seen side by side, they're very easy to distinguish just by size alone. Crows, on the other hand, much smaller, more petite bill, more of a smooth, rounded look, a little bit shorter tailed. Vocalizations, of course, are quite different. Crows are typical caw, caw, caw that we hear all the time, morning and evening as they're migrating up, and ravens are croaking. So another interesting thing, I'll go to the flight shot. That's an American crow on the right and a raven on the left. Okay. So the same two species in flight. An interesting thing, though, is crows do not soar. They may glide for short periods, even somewhat extended periods at times, but they're generally always flapping or gliding very briefly. Ravens, if you see large black birds soaring, often in a group or just single birds or a pair, it's going to be a raven because you never see crows do that. The difference in size kind of carries over. I've kind of made these size of them to be roughly showing the comparative sizes. And with the raven much bigger, I mean, this big bill. Now, of course, the farther away they are, it's harder to judge the bill size. So it's a lot easier when they're close. But another nice feature when they're flying is the tail. Ravens, with some exceptions, there are some birds that don't show this, but almost every raven shows a very noticeable long wedge-shaped tail. Crows have a very rounded short tail by comparison. So that shape is the only time I ever have problem telling crows and ravens apart is if I'm catching them at a weird angle, flying away, or very distant, or if a crow's gliding more than I expect for it to. But again, they're both common residents throughout the county, except crows are kind of absent from the mountains and deserts.
That's changed since I was growing up. You went to the mountains or desert to see a raven. The crows dominate our lowlands here. And now you can get a raven anywhere.
And yeah, we might mention, as you probably know, both are kind of problematic, very adaptable, very smart, and increased in numbers, concentrated in cities and where they can find food. And they're nest predators, of course, of other birds. So in normal numbers, they're fine. You know, everything's adapted to it ecologically, but you get greater numbers of crows and ravens, you get higher nest predation for songbirds and our other native birds. These are both native birds also, but it is something of concern for birds and birders. So that's common raven on the left and a crow on the right.
Okay.
Not too many flycatchers, we promise.
Yes, but just enough to wet the whistle. So these two are often in our area together, or seasonally, you may see one versus the other, but pretty yellowy underneath, pretty long tails, grayish above, yellow below, white in the throat area mostly. So they can be tricky, right? So it looks like we have kingbirds here, right? And there's two regular kingbirds, and then there's at least one other tropical kingbird. We don't have tropical here, although the one on the left could resemble a tropical. This bird, even though this bird looks like it's shaded, it has a very dark hood. This bird is paler, but it's in full sun. It's pale all the way down the upper breast. Pale up to the cheek. And we see here some white outer tail feathers showing. And they look distinctive. They're not just a little bit of wear on the tail. This bird has, again, the dark hood. And then only when Sibley came out did I see he put a big white mustache. Check your book. He has a big white mustache right here. I'd never noticed that before, but it's there. And it makes the solid white cheek that goes across behind the eye, and then gray down here. So if you see a kingbird, dark head like this, and you don't see any white outer tail feathers, then you have the other. So on the left is a more of a migrant in our area, spring and fall migrant, especially in numbers in the spring. And on the right is the other, the Cassins. So Cassins versus Western. You're not supposed to see a Western in the winter. They'd be very rare here in the winter. They're all well south. Cassins is our winter kingbird, but more and more Cassins is staying year round. That's what I'm seeing, and they're nesting in our area, and they never used to nest right in our area. Whittier Narrows has nesting Cassins kingbirds. Be careful here, because all the feather has to do is wear a little bit, and it'll leave a pale edging. And that throws a lot of people off. Look for a big 1/8 of an inch wide band on the tail before you're sure you have the, and they have different vocalizations. Maybe Jon will do them for us. This one says chabir, chabir, chabir. And this one is more twittery, high pitched. I can't do that one. But these are our two regular kingbirds, and I'm finding Cassins are outnumbering Westerns now in most places around our valley.
Yep. Thank you, Mickey. Some sparrow-like birds, although these are actually finches, but structurally they're pretty similar to sparrows. So, pardon me if I butcher the Latin, because I took 2 years of Latin in high school and I have not remembered a single word. But these are used to be Carpodacus finches, which means fruit eating, and now they're Hymoris finches, and I don't know what that means actually, but they changed the genus name. So we have several in our area, and they're characterized by these finch-like bills, females at least, brownish color overall and streaked underparts. They're roughly separated elevationally, but it's kind of a very rough rule. We have a Cassin's finch, which is found at higher elevations above 7,000, 7,500 feet. And they do come down a little bit in winter, but they're generally not found in the lowlands, very rare. The other two, we have a purple finch, which kind of occupies the intermediate elevation, again, with a lot of overlap. And purple finch, we can tell by a very strong face pattern, at least compared to house finch, but longer bill. They're both brown, but you notice the tone of brown is a little bit different. So even if you got all brown birds, you can say, oh, after you start watching birds for quite a while, you say, like, I can tell the difference between that green, or that brown and that brown, which can be helpful to identify. Now, this is not a great picture on the left because it's kind of wet or disheveled, but that face pattern alone is enough to lead you to a female purple finch. And they're found in our foothill canyons, like Arroyo Seco and up higher Switzers. They'll breed up there, and they're more widespread into the lowlands in winter. One of the most reliable places to see purple finches is the parking lot at Whittier Narrows Nature Center in winter for some reason. It's very hard to miss there. And then the next one, as you might guess, probably everyone knows the other species, is a house finch, one of the most common and widespread songbirds in the county, in the state. They're mostly absent from the higher mountains, although I see them up at Blue Ridge at like 7,000 feet plus. So they do get up to higher elevations, but generally you'll find Cassin's finches up there. Very plain bird, very plain faced, kind of blurry streaks below. And this is the bird that'll nest on your under your house or somewhere like that. They're very adaptable and get along very well in human environments. And of course, year-round residents. Oops.
All right. We've got some color here. They're giant on the screen, but I think they look like small birds based on the twigs and the leaves they're in. So we have a bright yellow bird on the left. We have 3 small yellowy birds in this group. They have sharp, pointy warbler-like bills. I don't think it's going to be a tanager. The bill is wrong. So these look like warblers. If it's not a yellow warbler, and it's not a Wilson's warbler, that leaves orange-crowned warbler. You'll spend months and months trying to see the orange on the crown. So some of our birds have that problem with the book. If you're learning them first in the book and then you go out in the field, where is the orange crown? I can see it here, right? If you make it up, it's kind of right there. But it's hidden under the feathers. And when they're agitated or going into breeding agitation, they'll show the crown. So this is a lutescens. That is the palest, or I should say the brightest yellow of our orange crowns. We have about 4 subspecies of orange crowned warbler. Well, the one on the right must be something different, and it is, but it's a different subspecies of orange crowned warbler. So that's how different they can be. So there's one living out in the Great Basin and especially the Rocky Mountains, and that looks like this one with so-called gray-headed type orange crown warbler, Orestora. Sibley chose not to use scientific names for subspecies. He called them by their geography. The National Geographic gives you the subspecies name. So they differ that way. This bird shows much more olive on the back, but if we had a side view, it would probably still be yellowy under here, yellow under tail coverts, a gray hood that looks almost like a McGillivrays warbler, a broken eye ring, but that same slightly down curved bill, sharp pointy bill. So these are uncommon, but not rare. We get them in our area. And there's two other likely possible ones, but we don't get the eastern one very often. So only one other. There's one on Catalina Island, Channel Islands, Sordida, and that's a third look to study. Any more?
Yeah, I'll do the second one if you want. All right, well, Mickey already alluded to the species on the right, but this picture on the left is the same picture as in the previous slide. So a gray-headed type orange crown warbler. And then Mickey had mentioned they do look kind of like McGillivray's warbler. And it's easy to confuse these two species because obviously they're quite similar. A grayish head, olive green body, and a split, fairly conspicuous eye ring, more so on McGillivray's. But this McGillivray's was taken at Bear Divide, I think in 2022, when they were banding birds up there. So orange crown warbler, common year-round resident with an influx of migrants, and this gray-headed especially is typically only found in fall and winter, nesting, as Mickey said, in the Great Basin Rocky Mountain region. But otherwise, the ludescens or lutescens subspecies is present throughout the year. And the bird on the right, as kind of already identified, is a McGillivray's warbler, which is a fairly common spring and maybe slightly less common fall migrant, almost unheard of in winter. There are a very, very few winter records of McGillivray's in Southern California, and I mean like maybe 5. So they do breed in very small numbers up in the higher San Gabriel Mountains. Buckhorn, they used to breed along Swarthout Valley near Wrightwood. Not sure if there are any recent records up there, but they're uncommon and local breeders in the higher mountains around water. And of course, you get further north in the Sierra Nevada, they're much more common breeders up there. That's certainly my favorite warbler and maybe certainly in the top 10 of my favorite birds. I don't know, there's just something really cool about them. They're very, very furtive generally. So they're hard to get a look at, but when like an adult male jumps out with that dark gray crown and that olive green and yellow underparts and that like crisp white crescent eye ring, it's just, I think they're beautiful. Anyway, enough of me waxing poetic.
But you're right. Oh boy. So you're at Leg Lake and you're looking at 300 Canada geese on the lawn, in the water, all around the lake, trying to count them. If you're an e-birder, you try to estimate them. But then sometimes some of them look a little smaller, once in a rare while. And in this, the right time of year, mostly winter visitor, the most important thing to look on these is, well, first you're going to see size. These little guys in front, even though they're in front, they're much smaller than that big Canada goose in the back. So that one comes out as the most common in the back. And it clicks in as eBird on, they give the subspecies for that maxima type. But when you get these small ones, look at the bill also. The bill is much smaller. You can barely see this guy, but it has a bill all the way from there to there. This bill is stubby, blunt looking. This one's a little longer, but much smaller than that. So we've got 2 small geese here. Now, don't be fooled because there's 11 or so subspecies of Canada geese, 7 of Canada geese and about 4 of this goose. It's now a full species. If you haven't seen a cackling goose yet, you should get out and look for cackling geese. Now, between these two, if these are cackling geese, one of them's got a big white ring around the neck, the other does not. One of them seems darker here, much more chocolatey brown or blackish here. So they differ. The bill is really short on this guy, as I mentioned. So we have 2 kinds of cackling geese here, and you can tell them apart in the field. Most of the time, this ring is a good mark for the Alaskan type that comes down in the winter in low numbers to our area. So it's a nice find when you're pouring through all these geese. Maybe sometimes they act fairly tame and they'll go right by you. If you're not paying attention when you're looking for warblers, you might miss these. Then the other one is the smallest of all, said to be about the size of a mallard or just larger, chunkier than a mallard, and that's Minima. So in the early days, we had all these geese running around. We just called them Canada geese. There were subspecies and there was too many. I thought it was 13 at once. Now they have it down to 7 plus 4, 4 cackling geese. So keep an eye out for these. The size of the bird plus the bill really helps to narrow them down.
It's over here, be easier. And I should mention also the white collar can be variable in those subspecies. Typically has a white collar, but not necessarily that obvious. And I think it's even absent in some aleutians. So there's no end to the trickery of birds in trying to identify them. And if nothing else, and not just LA, but Florida, San Francisco, if nothing else, we're known for our parrots, among many other things, of course. And I remember like when I started birding in the 70s, you know, yellow-headed parrots, red-crowned parrots, we had flocks of them all around. And numerically, they've certainly increased. The number of species that have been released or escaped have increased. The number of species that are successfully breeding has increased. One of the most common are the Amazon parrots, the big, fairly big parrots with the short squared tails, not long-tailed like a parakeet. But we have several different kinds, yellow-headed, which is pretty obvious and conspicuous. And then we have two that are quite similar in appearance, lilac-crowned and red-crowned. And there are several ways you can tell the difference. Lilac-crowned has a slightly longer tail for lilac-crowned, which you can sometimes see in flight. It's noticeable, but it's not super obvious. The forehead is a good clue. On the left, where did maybe I didn't have my lilac-crowned parrot label disappeared. Anyway, lilac-crowned parrot on the left. Now, lilac-crowns, adults at least, have this very dark red patch. So it's a different color red, and it's more abbreviated than an adult red-crowned. Juvenile red-crowns can have a smaller patch, but it's still that brighter red color. And then the color on the top of the head, lilac, as opposed to kind of more of a blue color, that is kind of subtle to me without a really good look. In this picture, we're fortunate that we have a really good view of the head and the color and the differences. But often in the field, I often see these at Betty Davis Park in Glendale, and they're way up in the top of a sycamore and they're backlit or it's overcast. And you're like looking at it and you're like, oh, I cannot tell what color that is. And then again, the problem you get is when you get a juvenile red-crowned parrot with a smaller red patch compared to the lilac-crown on the left. But in adult birds, it's pretty straightforward if you get a good look. And red-crown is by far the most numerous all throughout the San Fernando and San Gabriel Valley. And lilac-crowned are fairly common, but a lot less in number.
Comes up second.
Oh, does it? Oh, it does. Got it backwards. Okay. Now we're square.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Okay. So grayish, brownish birds, Chris's favorite birds. Yeah. Yeah. He's saying he'll be happy when they're all one species. It took a long time for them to figure out what species these were. So you can, fool your friends and just say, that's an Empidonax flycatcher. Yeah. Wow. Where'd you learn that Latin? Empidonax is a pretty large genus of flycatchers in our area. And they probably cause more arguments than any other bird in our area. Somebody said husbands and wives almost have separated over these birds. So on the left, this is kind of tricky. John's fooling us here with a back view only for a side view on this bird, or 3/4 angle. But this bird looks kind of dull grayish overall, but it has a wonderful almond-shaped eye ring. That one is not quite so pointy, but almond-shaped eye ring, a really nice solid yellow underbill or the mandible, the lower bill. And what else do we have? These can be much more yellow, especially fall. We want to look here carefully for things like wing projection. or primary projection. By the way, I thought those were the same thing for a long time. I think wing projection goes from here to here. And primary projection really is the outer several feathers from the tertials in this area. So learn your secondaries, tertials, and primaries, because even through your binoculars, and certainly when you get home with your camera, you can look at the length of these feathers compared to the rump area. It goes well beyond the rump on this bird, and it's pretty short on this bird. So if I saw one of these, I would expect to see a lot of yellow most of the time, yellow everywhere. Often olive, more olive on the back. This is a grayish olive, kind of squarish head, fairly large bill, small black bill. So what the heck are these two? What do we have? This one. Too nervous.
Yep, no, somebody said Pacific slope.
Pacific slope flycatcher is the subspecies name now. And the one on the right looks like a Hammond's flycatcher, only because that's what Jon said. He put these in here. So this one you're going to see all the time. It nests in our area. Many of the other Empidnacs do not nest in our immediate area. They might nest high in our mountains like the dusky flycatcher, but they're mostly going to be migrants. So look at tail length, length of the wing tips, and that's very helpful. You'd have if you had a wrong answer, it would be based heavily on this that you didn't look for. So these can be very colorful, more than this one shows. I'm sure it's yellowy on the underside. These have a tinge of yellow, but not all the way up to the chin. These usually are yellow all the way up to the chin area.
Mickey?
Yeah.
I didn't know they were split, but didn't they used to be Western and then they were
Yes,
split? And
in the 1970s-ish, they used to be Western flycatchers throughout the West. Then they split it into Pacific slope, which is basically Pacific slope of Washington, Oregon, California, and the interior race species was Cordilleran flycatcher, which nested from the very eastern Sierra Nevada all the way through the Great Basin and ranges. So that was done, I think, mostly through field study and observations. And then just this year, they decided, nope, they're just one species. There's not enough genetic, behavioral, or vocal difference between them to justify. So, yeah, you lost a bird from your life list. And as Mickey noted, the color of these birds, these two pictures are relatively dull. When you see Empidnax flycatchers in sunlight, they can look very washed out and very dull. You see a bird fly from the sunlight into shade and good light, and they just pop with green and yellow color. So my preference is to see them in shade because they're much more attractive. And then I think these are our last flycatchers, but this is a worthwhile comparison. I've given away that they're flycatchers, but you probably by now recognize that. So these are two species in two different genuses, not just different species, but in different genuses, but they're extremely similar superficially. There's a few things I'll just kind of go over to look at. The bill shape, overall shape is pretty similar. An interesting thing to look at is color. The one on the left is kind of a richer olive brown, and the one on the right is more of a colder gray-green. Mickey mentioned last slide about primary extension. Bird here, short to medium primary extension that doesn't go too much past the upper tail coverts. This bird looks like it's got pretty long primary extension. If we had a straight back angle like this bird, they would look even longer. So we've got two very similar species in appearance, but two different species. The one on the left is a willow flycatcher. These are late spring migrants, generally don't show up until May, passing through into early June. They don't breed anywhere in LA County that I'm aware of. They breed up at Kern River Preserve, out in the desert, places in Sierra Nevada. And they're absent. Both of these species actually are completely absent in winter. To find one of these in winter in California would be, the rarest of rare birds, even though they're common at other times. So different tone of color, more rich olive brown on the willow flycatcher on the left, and the bird on the right. is a western wood pewee. They typically have a vested kind of appearance, which you can't see as much here, but they have kind of darker sides to the breast and a pale stripe up the middle. Pewees also tend to take more conspicuous perches. They'll perch higher or out on the edge of a tree, whereas Empidonax flycatchers like the willow will perch like in between the branches or lower down toward the ground. So that behaviorally, it's not a foolproof way, but it's a good clue to what it is. Vocalizations are quite different. Willow flycatcher's song is like a fitspew, fitspew. Their call note is a soft whit, like a. And western wood pewees, their typical call is like a buzzy kind of descending. So vocally, you won't mix those two up, but they're both very common spring migrants and fairly common fall migrants as well. But flycatchers are some of my favorites, partly because they're difficult. But with practice, you can call most of them.
Okay,
Now it's your turn, Mickey.
my turn. Well, one good turn deserves another. We don't rehearse this thing, by the way. Okay, so these are kind of gull-like birds, flying, both flying. I never looked this up, but I think the one on the left has remarkably long wings. I don't think you didn't stretch that picture, right? The long, skinny wings. The one on the right certainly does too, but they don't look quite as lengthy. I want to look into that. But both of these have either orangey or reddish colored bills, but one has a little thicker bill than the other. And I could be fooled by this, and maybe we were initially setting this up. The bird on the left has a fairly dark orange bill, but it's uniformly orange all the way to the tip. It's got this bald pate look, and it should be a little larger than this bird. Maybe the proportions are about right here. This bird has an orangey bill too. It happens to be a little darker, but the tip is yellow. It fades from orange to yellow at the tip. That's a good mark. It's also a thinner bill, not as heavy, not as thick as this one. So these are two that can cause trouble down at the coast, in the sand, at the beaches. Good place to compare them is like near Bayona. Bayona area, especially Dockweiler Beach, tends to have them sitting near each other. I like it that way. This color to me should be over here.
Yeah, this is kind of weird because the colors are kind of reversed on these.
This one's supposed to have darker orange and this one has paler orange. So on the left, we have a royal tern. And on the right, we have the pretty common elegant tern. So I always remember Laura's husband did a pirouette and said, that's an elegant tern. He liked that name. So other than the color here that throws me a little bit, the bill shape is more important. The shape of a bird is more important than color. Hard parts don't change the way other parts do. So the size of the bill, especially the thickness, is important on royal versus. But if I'm approaching a group of terns sitting in the sand and not trying to scare them up, you get closer and you really start looking at the bills carefully. And then you'll have juveniles with an even paler yellow bill, or orangey yellow bill. So you have adults mixed with juveniles and you have two species together. So work on royal and elegant. You probably see more elegance than royals most of the year. This one's a summer visitor, and this one's even more common as a winter visitor, but they mix at the right season.
About the tail, elegant can have longer streamers than that. So that's kind of not shown in this photo, but royal generally has a shorter, broader tail, and elegant, a much longer, slimmer tail. So, but this illustrates how you can, it's dangerous to use a single field mark because birds at different stages of molt or wear or just individual variation can look different. So as Mickey said, yeah, the bill shape, often the color, but the bill shape especially, and that kind of bald headed with the eye separated from the black crown on royal on the left is a good clue too. elegant generally has the black coming around to encircle the eye. And then we got a few sparrows to look at. This is probably recognizable to most people as a typical juvenile white-crowned sparrow. This bird actually is up the coast in Santa Barbara County. You might notice that the bill is a little paler, a little yellower than the typical Gamble's type white-crowned sparrows we see down here in the lowlands in winter. And it's an immature bird because of the brown crown stripes. Adults, of course, will have black and white crown stripes. So that is a white-crowned sparrow, an immature, either Pugetensis or Nuttall or Nuttall. Nuttall is resident along the central California coast. Pugetensis breeds further north, but then migrates south, so it can overlap Nuttall, and Pugetensis even comes into Los Angeles County in winter. So you can find these at the coast and in the interior in small numbers. And then we have our more typical Gamble's type white-crowned sparrow, extremely common in winter in the lowlands and even up into the mountains, but they don't spend any time in the summer in Los Angeles County. There's actually a different subspecies. It's not is it Oriantha? Yeah. Oriantha is the dark lord subspecies that breeds in the Sierra Nevada. But this is not that one. Those are very rare migrants in our area, but this has a white above the eye between the crown stripe and the eye. And you can see a little dark black coming in on the crown. So this bird is molting into adult plumage. But the back pattern on the left bird, Pugetensis or Nuttall, is typically paler, less defined than Gamble's, but I don't find that always a really obvious field mark. The bill color is generally a good one to go by. And I think we have a map. White-crowned sparrows are very complex in multiple subspecies. Leucophrys is an eastern subspecies. I don't believe that's been recorded in California, maybe once or twice. Gambleii is the common one that you can see breeds well to the north, Canada and Alaska, and that's a very common winter bird for us. Oriantha is the Sierra Nevada and Great Basin mountain breeding race. And then Pugetensis, as I mentioned, is the North Coast migratory subspecies, and Nuttall is the resident Central California coast subspecies. So it is complex. And then you see the winter ranges on the right. So
Take note that there's a leapfrog thing going on there, which is interesting at birds. You'd think the closest ones to us in the summer would be our winter visitors. Instead, Gambleii jumps all the way across and comes down to the south and goes beyond some of these races. The one, as John said, Nuttall doesn't move. So it's pretty interesting. If you're a bird bander, you like to get the subspecies correct. You can even measure the wings and tell them apart by millimeters. But it's an interesting group. If you're like me, you're e-birding and you're busy looking at a lot of different birds, they're all white-crowned sparrows. You're supposed to break them down. It's going to be Gambleii most of it.
Poor sparrows.
Okay. The younger you are, the more trouble you have with these birds. And I had a lot of trouble in my early years trying to separate, especially the upper one and the one on the right, because the one on the left, I didn't think I'd ever see. So these are all streaky sparrows. We can agree on that. They all have some rust in them. Some of them have a little more color on their flank areas. Here is the flank, and here looks like a beige color here, tan, and over here a real rusty flank area. So up here we ought to start with this bird, the most abundant in wet places, even away from water, but after rains they'll be out in a park situation. So this is a song sparrow. And look in your book for how many kinds of song sparrows there are. It's incredible. They look like different species, some of the biggest and the smallest, and different colors. But our song sparrow always has a good deal of rust on the wing, this facial pattern, a white mustache. I mean, they're all variations on a theme, but song sparrow is the one to learn first. Then This fellow comes in twice a year, especially comes through our area. These also don't nest in our area except possibly high mountain meadows, eastern San Gabriel's and San Bernardinos especially. But in our area, they're showing up in March, especially heavily in the spring. But again, in November, December, you can get lots of them coming through. This is a Lincoln sparrow. And to me, they're the prettiest of the three in many ways, a delicate little sparrow. The bill is different to me. It's more pointy, narrower, a little narrower and more pointy than these guys. When I look at this one, I don't, I don't see what I just said, except that it's sharper here. And it is a more delicate bill. The colors on this are just terrific. Especially the fine streaking is very thin and fine compared to thick and blotchy streaks. Streaks are here on this bird. So Lincoln's is just a very pretty sparrow. There's some rust on the wing, nice back pattern. But if I see the face alone, that usually gives it away, the gray combination with that small bill, and then a buffy wash across the breast. So song, Lincoln's, and this is the jump up and down a little bit when you get one of these. This is a swamp sparrow, eastern United States. And so it's obviously closely related to the song sparrow. It's got a lot more rust on the wing, up and down the wing and even down the back. I think the tail is pretty rusty. This is probably the best clue. If you get a quick look at it, you can see that wash on the sides, which is kind of rusty looking. The streaks stop here, not very streaky here at all. And a different face pattern. That looks kind of yellowy. I don't remember that. But a stronger, sharper face pattern on the swamp sparrow. But these will pop out on a lawn near a pond with song sparrows feeding right next to them. So you'd have to watch for a swamp sparrow. And to me, the camera really helps. You can bring them home and check them out carefully. So swamp, song, Lincoln's. And of course, if you knew their vocalizations, that would help too.
All right, thank you. The only caveat I would mention is juvenile song sparrows can show a breast pattern quite like this and a suffusion of buff throughout the face. But they do have that's heavier structure Mickey talked about, a heavier bill, a more robust bird. But they can have a pattern pretty similar to this. So if you're in spring and summer, always beware, especially in summer, because we don't have Lincoln sparrows down in the lowlands or in the mountains, just very locally. Always consider a juvenile song sparrow. And then we have some shorebirds. They're sandpipers and there are plovers, and they're among other shorebirds, but two big groups are sandpipers and plovers. Plovers are pretty distinct with big dark eyes, big round heads, and a specifically shaped bill, not straight and even like most sandpipers have. So what we have here are two plovers. These aren't quite, I didn't size these quite correctly because these are virtually identical in size in life. We've got the bird on the left with a pretty strong breast band. It brings to mind a killdeer, but killdeer have two strong breast bands and don't look quite like this in shape. Those orangey legs will give this away as a semi-palmated plover. Bird that's a fairly common migrant spring and fall, and many wetland places, especially near the coast. And they're present in winter as well, but pretty much absent in summer. And then the other bird is the much talked about in some circles, snowy plover, which is the same size, very pale bird, an incomplete breast band, sandy color. They blend right into the sand. Malibu Lagoon at the beach there in fall and winter is about the most reliable place in the county to see these, although you can also find them at Dockweather Beach and occasionally elsewhere. But it's a bird that's rather threatened. Obviously, being shorebirds, they nest on sandy beaches. And if they nest on sandy beaches in California, they've obviously got a lot of competition from human beachgoers. So they've tried roping off the nesting area with some limited success at Malibu Lagoon and elsewhere. They also breed at inland lakes, dry lakes, and playas, and more successfully there since there's much less disturbance. But it's a bird that's really suffered due to, urbanization and human use of the beach. Yeah. They're the cutest little birds. And all of a sudden they just run real quick. But until you see a move, unless you know what you're looking for, you can find them pretty easily. But if you don't know what you're looking for, they blend right in.
More shorebirds. Well, let's start with the ghostly pale one. That's, to me, that's what I see from a distance too, is the whitest of all the little shorebirds, peeps. Happen to have a pretty thick, straight bill, but I look for just this pale all the way down from the head down all the way underbelly. The back is not very bright or brown. This is winter plumage, or so-called basic plumage. Birds are in basic plumage over half of the year. That's why it's called basic. Alternate is what they go into for breeding. So we used to call it breeding plumage. Alternate. So this is a sanderling, black legs. Wait, somebody got it back there. So sanderlings, and they also look like they have wheels, right? They run so fast down to the water. The wave comes in, they run back again. Back in, when the water goes out, it brings up the crabs and things, sand crabs and small things thereafter. So it's kind of the bird, though, that I forget. I'm looking for other things and suddenly realize those are sanderlings over there. On the right, we have shorebirds that are somewhat scaly on the back. I think these are both juveniles. A lot of black spots in the center of the scapulars here and here. The bill length is kind of interesting on these two. And I was reminded that the female of this species has a longer bill. And often we attribute larger and longer to males and not females. But these should be two western sandpipers, winter plumage. And so these are juveniles arriving from the north, way up, maybe Alaska, British Columbia, Alaska, breeding. Black legs and a pretty thick, long bill separates them from least sandpiper. Least is a very common sandpiper. It's with us almost year-round, especially winter visitor. So these are two western sandpiper. Clean white below, not much breast banding, and always some trace of rust in the wing scapular area. The mantle or the back and the scapulars, rusty color. And I'll bet you're going to go on to the next group of shorebirds.
All right. Now, to be honest, the last picture you saw were those two birds in the upper left just cropped out, because I wanted a comparison. We wanted to have a comparison with sanderling. So that's the same picture, but this is the whole original picture. This was down on the Los Angeles River, and these four birds look pretty similar, and three of them are the same species. And for all the reasons Mickey just described, that long, slightly drooped bill, a bigger bird. So you can see the smaller bird on the right here is a little bit different, still very similar, a little bit smaller, but a very evenly colored kind of brownish back and a pretty straight, stubby bill by comparison. So this is actually a semi-palmated sandpiper. We had the semi-palmated plover, now we got a semi-palmated sandpiper. And this is a primarily rare fall migrant. The normal places you see these are, you go to Willow Street on the LA River is where you get your fall semi-palmated, and also at the Paiute Ponds on Edwards Air Force Base. Sometimes they turn up occasionally at Malibu Lagoon or down at Ballona Creek on the salt pan there. There was one this fall. But very similar and very tough to pick out generally from a flock of Western sandpipers with which they intermingle. But always a fun find, and I always hope to get my semi-palmated sandpiper every fall, get it under my belt along with the other scarce ones. That's about it for that one. Did anybody have any questions? Well, yeah, I mentioned a little bit the straight stubby bill, no droop to the bill. Often they say it's got a blunt tipped bill, and a lot of semi-palmateds do have a blunt tipped bill. Others don't. Others have a rather fine tip. So that feature is variable, but the very evenly colored brown back. I've heard it said that they're supposed to have a more of a defined face pattern, more of a plover-like face, but I've never really found that to be much help. Back color and bill size and shape are what I generally go by. And we had a couple of these, Luke, when we were down on the, was it the first or the second LA River trip that we did for Pasadena Audubon in August? Yeah, maybe in August. So we had 2 down there, which was kind of extra nice.
Okay, a whole different group of birds. These are kind of like Ed Sullivan birds. I bet a lot of people don't even know who Ed Sullivan was. So these are some kind of herons, heron-like birds in the heron group. They don't look like great blue herons or green herons. They're kind of dull brownish or grayish birds with spots all over the back. They're both juveniles. If they were adults, we would hardly have to talk about them, but the juveniles are more look-alike. You know how they mix babies up in hospitals? It happens with birds too. They look much more alike when they're young. So this one, a little more chocolatey brown, a thin bill compared, it would look thick if it was by itself, but compared to this monster, we got a big, more blunt bill, very thick. This one has no neck and this one does, but that's posture thing. This does seem to have a longer neck. It's developing a black cap and a pale color here, dark eye stripe. It looks like it's got a more interesting face than this one. Yellow a little here. The spots on the back are very tiny on this bird. So over here, this is a bird that can be confused with an American bittern, but you're going to be very lucky to get an American bittern in LA County. It happens, but for them to even be out in the open this much. So this is a black-crowned night heron, the more common, by far the most common of our night herons. Night herons are forming their own group. They're in a genus differing from other herons, juvenile. So this one is the other more rare one. And it's not too many years ago we would jump up and down and get in the car to go see one of these. But now there's up to 3, 4, 5 in one place at a time. They're showing up in many places down in the coastal edge, Long Beach, a lot of them in the Bayona area now. So this is a yellow-crowned night heron from the eastern United States, probably east and southern United States. So you can get pretty good at this if you're just careful. Look at it, bring your photo home and see it. Wow, I thought it was this, but it's actually this one. So they're nesting in our area now. What happens first? We see a few individuals, then 5 years goes by, 10 years, and then suddenly we have a pair and they're building nests. So we're getting more and more yellow-crowned night herons. Anything to add?
Thanks. No, that's good.
I've got the way I'll tell you the way I remember them. So in the juvenile, the shape of the bill is the thing to look at, but the coloration of the bill is the thing to look at too. So it's black bill, yellow crown, yellow bill. If you look at the lower mantle and most of the bottom of the upper mantle, it's yellow bill and black crown. That's the speech.
Just remind me one more thing. Look at the legs.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
The length of the upper part of the leg, tarsus, femur.
Yeah.
Anyway, it goes. Look how long that leg is compared to these legs.
Yeah.
It's not just because of the position. When the yellow crown flies over, the legs stick way out in the back. They're longer than the other. So that's one last feature.
All right. And Mickey just mentioned the yellow-crowned night herons are increasing. We've got one of these 2 birds. There's another species that's increasing in the area, probably both due to climate change as it's getting warmer waters. So if you're familiar with water birds at all, that shape, those big black feet and that hooked bill leads you to believe that these are probably cormorants. And they are in fact cormorants. The one on the left are very common throughout the county, wherever there's water and along the coast, double-crested cormorant. This is a young bird, but it's a pretty heavy, robust bird. And we've got a couple more slides that'll show the differences a little better. but very common. This used to be the only cormorant away from the immediate coast that you had to worry about 5-7 years ago. Neotropic cormorants were not recorded in the county up until then. So the bird on the right is a neotropic cormorant. It's a much smaller, slimmer bird, longer tailed, and that little inverted white V at the base of the bill, at least in adults during breeding season, is very conspicuous and distinctive. So adult double cresteds, like the bird on the left, are just blackish, but otherwise look the same. So it's always nice to see them together. And that really shows you the difference. You've got a double crested cormorant, slightly closer, but still those neotropics look positively tiny. And you can see the little inverted base of the bill, even without the white outline. That's a totally different shape than you get on the double crested. And that is two double crested at the half out of the frame on the right and on the left, and two neotropic cormorants in the middle. And then since we're on that kick, there's two right next to each other. Now the neck doesn't look quite as slim on that neotropic cormorant, but you can tell it's a smaller, slimmer bird, and that shape at the base of the bill and the white outline, especially in an adult breeding, is very conspicuous and obvious. There were 10 of these, I think, at the San Gabriel Coastal Basin Spreading Grounds in Pico Rivera over the weekend. Like I say, they were first recorded, I think it was Benelli Reservoir, Puddingstone Reservoir at Benelli about 7 years ago was the first county record. Then 2 and 3 turned up there. And now it's not unusual to see these almost anywhere. You see them along the LA River, at Santa Fe Dam, any body of water they can turn up now. Check on your cormorant.
I'm handing the mic back.
Yeah. I put this one in because I thought this was kind of fun. And we put a couple like really sort of challenging photos in here. And this was a bird, if you follow LA County records very closely, this was a bird that was at Veterans Park in Sylmar early this year, February or March, I forget. But out there birding among all the yellow-rumped warblers, we spotted a bird up in the eucalyptus and we said, look at the breast streaking on that bird. Does that look odd to you? And it did. And so we snapped a few photos, and I don't think we ever could have really documented this bird without the photographs, because what we could see with binoculars was just not enough to do it. But the things to look for, and you can not see it that well in this picture, but it's got a very long, very sharp pointed, slightly down curved bill. And it's accentuated by the fact that some of those feathers are missing, worn away, which can happen when they feed on eucalyptus or olive. They get that oil in there and messes up the feathers, but it's got a pretty long, spiky, down curved bill. And just very slightly, you can see a little pale patch of, maybe you could call it yellowish right here. So this is actually a Cape May warbler, which is a very, very rare bird in California. And this next picture is the bird, another Cape May warbler, but this is the one that was at Loyola Marymount University for the past 2 winters. So this shows the field marks a little bit better. Some kind of fine streaking, bit of yellow wash on the breast, kind of grayish on the neck with this yellow wrap around here is very distinctive, and a supercilium, but it could be easily passed off as a yellow-rumped warbler if you're not paying that close attention. But this one was a lot more cooperative than that other bird. But fun find.
We're approaching the end here. Woodpeckers, right? Anyone have any other ideas? No. Okay, so male or female? Males, both of them. All that red on the head. Females would be all black and white. So the bird on the left, what we'd look for, first of all, you'd like to know where you are. Are you on the coast or are you out in the desert? But let's not mention that yet. Let's look here. And look here, big black patch here where the white ladder or the white horizontal bars go stop right here and leave a black almost up to the nape. This one, the bars go all the way up almost to the neck. This one looks like a bird with a white face and a black markings. This one looks like black face with some white markings. So a lot more black on this one. The position of the red can be helpful. You have to be careful because I used to band these and occasionally I'd catch a young one. And the females have some red, and it's speckly and back farther on the head. Can be very confusing. But on the left, we have a Nuttall's woodpecker. And on the right, we have a ladder-backed woodpecker.
Opposite. Yeah,
Left, right. Correct. Thank you.
you had all the field marks right, and then
I sure did. You're right. The white goes way up on the ladder back. Looks like a white face, black markings, black face, white markings. Now, if there are other marks, I usually don't see them or hear about them. These little headlights right here are famous for Nuttall's woodpecker. They both have pale that area, but you can see these are like little pale headlights on the front of the Nuttall's. So most people say, well, I don't worry about these. You'll see a lot of beginning birders reporting. I saw one about a week ago on eBird, ladderback woodpeckers downtown LA. So they just need to take a good look at that bird. It's not likely. These birds don't do a lot of moving. They're residents. The next slide, I think, will give us well, look at this bird. It has almost an equal amount of white and black, maybe a little more black than white. The white bars go all the way up to the nape, suggesting a ladderback. There are some ladderback features here, but that's a funny face. It doesn't look like a white face with black markings. So it has a lot of black on it. Was this Frank Gilliland's picture, I think?
I'm not sure.
Yeah. I think we were given this picture some time back. So I think he was calling this a hybrid, Nuttall's and ladderback. They're very closely related. They do hybridize where they come together, maybe out toward the Crystal Air area, Valyermo. They see each other there. Some of them are in the same trees. You can get ladderbacks at Palmdale, or Pear Blossom Park is a good place. So we think this is a hybrid, and it does happen. The range map next shows you that the ladderback is much more widespread and it goes way across the Southwest into Texas. And the Nuttall's is typically coastal. It just barely fails to be a California only bird. It's in northern Baja, but it's one of our California birds. So, the two don't meet very often, but right in here where the thickness of this one meets the edge here is where you can get hybridization happening. So it does happen.
all right. Well, I always encourage people, if you're scanning either a flock of ducks or a flock of birds in a field, it's good to go over the flock several times because birds, different species sometimes don't stick out when you're first scanning it. So we have a flock of birds here. I think, is this probably down by the Salton Sea or?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we have cattle egrets are very common in the agricultural fields down there, and that's what you mainly expect. But of course, there are other egrets down there as well. So we actually, if you look carefully, you can see 3 species in this photo. So we've got a snowy egret with the black bill and yellow lowers in this picture. And if we could see its feet, it would have dark legs and yellow feet. And we have a bunch of cattle egrets, very stocky, short, with a thick orangey bill. Very distinctive, not very egret-like at all, really. And we also have a great egret, much larger than the other two, with an all orange bill and quite a bit larger. I'm going to keep running through the ducks. So we just thought we'd start off with like the common expected, either wild or domestic or feral mallards. So they're quite variable within their group, and the domestic varieties are almost limitless variations. So they're our most common duck generally, very common sight at parks, lakes. The adult males, of course, are instantly recognizable. One of the most famous ducks around, probably. So on the lower right, we have a male with a dark green head. We have a female in the middle with a dark bill, but otherwise same shape. And then a kind of a eclipse type male with a yellow bill on the upper. So just kind of a point of reference. There we go. And then we're looking at a couple other ducks. Female ducks and eclipse males, when they molt out of their alternate or breeding plumage for a month or two or so, can be very tricky to identify because they're brown and kind of featureless. This is looks like kind of a delicate duck, certainly not as big and robust as a mallard, but it's got a kind of orangey bill with a little dark on it. So this is a female gadwall. And if it was sitting right, we could see a little white patch of its secondaries here, which is an excellent mark. If you watch gadwalls for any amount of time, you'll probably see that white patch show up. And then we thought, what are we going to compare it with? Well, we'll compare it with this. This is probably a pretty easy one to guess if you just take a look at the color of the speculum. Some other ducks have a little bit of green in the wing, but green-winged teal has a green speculum, sometimes hidden when they're perched or sitting on the shore. But if you can see that green, and it's our smallest dabbling duck. It's got a very small bill, not as similar as the other teal, cinnamon and blue wing, which are very similar. But this is a petite little duck, and if you see that green wing, you know you've got a green-winged teal. And then we thought we'd show you the adult in breeding plumage. Beautiful ducks, I think. One's kind of almost gaudy, the green-winged teal on the lower right. But gadwalls are, if you look at these fine vermiculations on the feathers and just the overall color, there's this nice black rump, and here you can see the white patch from the secondaries. Really pretty, kind of subdued looking ducks. But gadwall male and a green-winged teal male. Green-winged teals are pretty stunning ducks, actually. And then I think we've only got 2 or 3 more.
So a small warbler is wobbling along on the ground, walking, and then you can't see it in the picture. And that's why photos aren't perfect. If you're out in the field, it's better to watch the bird. Look for the behavior, look for movements. You get all kinds of additional clues, vocalizations. So this bird is going to bob and teeter, walk, bob, walk, bob, maybe even run and bob. It's pretty brown. I think it's one of the brownest of our warblers. Most warblers are grays or blacks or other colors, yellow all over. This one has that bright yellow under rump, and it bobs, and it's brown, and it's got those double facial marks. So this is a palm warbler from back east, palm warbler. It's related to yellow rumped warblers, so you should see a lot of that feature in it, features. But to me, I just watch for these on lawns often, Santa Fe Dam, and just about any park or grassy lawn area, you could get a palm warbler. I don't think they need grass, but that's where I see them. And you're looking for other things. There's some house finches over here, and then all of a sudden this guy runs along and bobs, and you've got a palm warbler. We have a range map for you to give you an idea why we don't see very many here. They're east of the Rockies, and there's 2 subspecies. The bright yellow one, hypocrisia. Hypo means below, chrysia is gold. So this one is bright yellow below all the way up and down. The last palm warbler was mostly brown, even underneath was pale. Yellow was confined to the undertail coverts. So you can see why we don't get those. Palmarum is the one we do get. Notice how far west it comes, all the way to British Columbia, so that when a bird loses its pathway, if it comes straight south, it's going to end up on the California coast. So that's how we get that one, and we don't get hypocrisia very often at all.
Yeah, I thought I would want to throw in a very strange bird for the last slide, which this is. Definitely a strange bird. This is a North American bird of sorts that I wasn't even aware of until recently. But anybody have any idea what this might be? That's what I called it. Yeah, this was a bird. Yellow-breasted chats have a kind of a storied scientific classification. They used to be lumped in with the warblers. Then they were probably not really warblers. Or maybe they're with the They had a hooked bill, kind of like a shrike or a vireo. Maybe they're related to the shrikes and vireos. No, but now turns out that they're most closely related apparently to orioles. So they're closely related enough that they can hybridize. And this is a bird that's been out in Western Riverside County. I think they actually had a couple successive seasons where this bird was present and or nesting. But it's a yellow-breasted chat times oriole hybrid, and it sure looks funky, but it's a very pretty bird. But it's one of those things like, you never know what you're going to find when you're out birding. If a lot of people tend to jump on the hybrid if they see something, I don't know what it is. Well, maybe it's a hybrid. Often it's not, but sometimes it is. So it's always good to consider that. But it's got these blackish lores and kind of an intermediate bill between a chat and an oriole, but pretty cool looking bird. Yes.
No, what are the?
I do not know. eBird might have some vocal recordings of it in some of the checklists, but yeah, I'd be curious to see what it sounded like. I mean, they are vocalization wise. I mean, chats and orioles are kind of similar if you think about it. So, but that was a pretty cool one. It was a new one on me when I first heard about it about a year ago or so. But I like that one. And that's it. We've reached the end. A stern-looking American kestrel. All right. Does anybody have any other questions for Mickey or myself? Or all good?
There were a couple questions.
Oh, on the chat. Yes, by all means.
First, and I'll yell this out and hopefully you can hear it or repeat it. First, there was a question about crows versus ravens. Is another distinguishing fact that crows will group in these big flocks, but ravens really never do that.
Crows and ravens both can group into pretty large flocks. I would say probably the biggest flocks, ravens or crows outdo ravens in numbers, but you can see ravens in pretty big flocks gatherings and in certain places and times. I don't know if anybody's seen that. What's the Christian Cooper series on the something birder, the extraordinary birder. I forget what channel it's on, but I've seen an episode there where he was out in Palm Springs and they were kind of ties into ravens predating there's native birds, of course, but increased numbers predating native wildlife. And they go after baby desert tortoises, which are threatened. And they had big groups of them just lined up there out in Palm Springs and trying to figure out ways to disperse them and get them away. But yeah, they both do flock.
So there's something interesting about that, and that story comes from the East Coast, where on the East Coast, ravens are typically only found in pairs or in solitary. But one of the reasons on the West Coast that you find them in find ravens in huge flocks. So often, even very experienced East Coast birders will come to Lancaster and say, I saw huge flocks of ravens. Does that happen? And you say, yeah, that happens all the time. But they're just not used to it. And part of the thinking maybe that this as well is, that there may have been something called a Californian raven that was kind of more like a Chihuahuan raven. These desert Southwest ravens are more kind of sociable. And so that there's some genetic memory of that sociability, and maybe because they think the California raven was probably just genetically swamped at some point by common ravens, but their behavior is completely different to East Coast ravens. So that's where that thought comes from, because you could kind of think that if you're on the East Coast, but you can't when you're on the West Coast.
And we had a question about slide terms and bill color, and the person in the chat was asking, isn't that also something that can change radically as the year goes on?
Yes.
That's not always a reliable thing.
There's individual variation, of course, and there's seasonal change. In the breeding season, generally their colors are more heightened, more bright, more conspicuous. So taking different birds at different times of the year, you can certainly have overlap. In general, as Mickey and I said, you've got a longer, slimmer bill and elegant tern, generally more orangey, or at least more orangey toward the tip. And generally Royal Tern has a pretty red bill. But again, based on age and time of year, it's not 100% reliable feature, which is why bill shape, the thickness, and droop or lack thereof is probably the best way to differentiate them.
And we had it's half question, half comment, I guess, about the appendix flycatchers and how important the calls are. I assume you would both say, yes, learn the calls, but how often is that helpful? I see them way more than I hear.
It can be helpful. Dusky and willow both have a wit type call, or formerly Pacific Slope, now Western flycatcher has a Hammond's has a sharp pip, which is very different. The songs are different, and Pacific Slope flycatcher, of course, it's typical call. You hear, that's kind of the call that you hear all the time. Willows has that Fitzbue, it's like a Hammond's, Dusky, and Gray all have kind of a similar. There's no way I can imitate it, but it's a very similar call, and that takes some practice to learn. So those are kind of very similar. It takes some practice, a practiced ear to learn, but the others are pretty separable by call, at least Western. We can throw in Eastern flycatchers and pidnecks, and we have a whole other slew, but just generally just 5 to worry about in the West.
Get them to call more often.
Yeah, well, often they're silent, you know, it's helpful when they do call. They do, and there is hybridization as well. So again, a note, you always beware, hybrid is always a possibility, especially more so with birds like that are really closely related and flock together, than kind of an odd looking passerine you might see. Is maybe less likely to be a hybrid, but yeah, they do interbreed.
Any other questions
Anybody else?
here in the room? Or see any questions in the chat?
Good. All right. Well, on behalf of Mickey and myself, thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed.
Just want to say thanks very much to Mickey and Jon for continuing the tradition, you know, and, you know, if you really want to kind of get, you know, boned up on your, as a kind of beginner birder, come and join them for their introduction to birds workshops and field trips. If you want to test yourself with kind of bird photos, I don't know if everybody knows this already, or maybe some of you don't, but the eBird has a really great feature. If you go into the Explore section, there's you can do eBird quizzes. There's like a little section called eBird quizzes, and you can pick a date and a location pretty much anywhere around the world, and it will show you 20 photos, or it will give you 20 clips of songs for birds. So I'm currently using that to learn the birds of Thailand, where I'm going in about a month. And so far, the highest I've got is 19 out of 20. So yeah, I'm a bit worried about that. So anybody else from PAS have anything to add before we call it a day? No? Okay, well, look, great. Thanks for coming today in person or joining us on the Zoom. We'll hope to see you for field trips or meeting again soon. All right, thank you. Night.